What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't fucking know either. I guess we learned not to do it again.
Yes, sir.
I'm fucked if I know what we did.
Yes, sir. It's hard to say.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Hello, everybody. This episode you're about to listen to is going to discuss some pretty disturbing topics. We're going to talk a little bit about the genocide going on in Gaza. We are going to talk about what a tariff could mean for international relations. Now, by no means are we experts, and in some ways we might just be a little pessimistic about what the fate of the world may hold. However, we are going to talk about what it would look like should we get involved in a worldwide military conflict and not win. What that would look like for the American state, what that would look like for you at home. In addition, I would like to say that I am going to talk a little bit during this episode about politics in general in the United States. I am going to talk about my personal politics. I am going to talk about Palestinian politics, and I am going to talk about the concept of harm reduction. Um, I understand that as a cis white man living in a very safe state, in a very safe country in the world, that I am speaking to anyone listening from a position of immense privilege, probably one of the most privileged positions anyone in history has ever had as a white man in America. I do not wish to offend, disregard, minimize, or otherwise disturb anybody who's listening, or have anybody get it twisted about who I am as a person and what I intend. I personally believe that the working class should be intersectional, massive, and should overthrow fascism with incredible violence. When I speak to all of you about what I believe, what I've heard, what I understand, I am very open to correction. I want to hear it if I'm saying something wrong, if my position of privilege has blinded me to something, please inform me of that. Feel free to reach out to our email. Fucking DM me on Twitter. Our email is redconnections1917@gmail.com. You can yell at me there, and trust me, I will address it if I have said anything incorrectly. So please let this function as your trigger warning. Let this also be a bit of a reminder to those of you who listen to both this podcast and my other podcast, Guerrilla Radio Show, that for all the bits and antics I ever do, I do my best to be a good person, a good comrade, and a good socialist. Thank you very much, and please listen ahead at your own caution. Thank you.
You can also yell at
You
me
can
for the
also
record.
yell at John.
I also probably got a lot wrong. Yeah.
It's the only thing we have left in America.
Soon we will actually. Yeah. It's one of.
Yeah.
Oh, Christ. Okay, we're recording.
You're okay. We can always cut whatever out.
Yeah. It's.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode, what is this? Fucking 6?
6.
5? Welcome
6.
to episode 6 of Red Connections. It happened again. This has happened before. It's just gonna keep happening.
All of this has happened before. All of this will happen again. Time is a flat circle.
See, one thing you have to remember, everyone at home, is that nothing ever happens and everything happens all at the same time.
That's dialectics, baby.
The dialectic is when there are two things.
Indeed.
Okay.
Exactly. I'm gonna need you to, okay, here's the thing. This is like my greatest sin as an alleged Marxist. I don't get dialectics still as like a heuristic.
I have a confession to make. I don't think anyone does, really. Like I think only Hegel knew what the fuck he was talking about, and the rest of us have been guessing since then.
I should read Phenomenology of the Spirit. You should reread it, and then we both just have an episode where we just like do Lovecraftian invocations as we
Please do not make me read Phenomenology of Spirit a second time. All right. I think it took me like 6 months to do it the first time because it's such a pain in the ass.
I can't believe like Capital is easier to read than
Phenomenology
Capital
of the Spirit. It's just economics homework. Like
it's
Phenomenology of the Spirit is like a nightmare come alive from the words of I'm so tired of 19th century philosophers.
It's one of those it's one of those like Hyperborea edits if it had been made in like 1820s Germany.
Yes, it's the Ron DeSantis Hyperborea edit, but from a left perspective.
When you consider what Hegel's actual personal politics are, not that far from the Ron DeSantis from the modern Republican Party's politics.
That's true. Hegel did kind of suck. All right, before we get too far off topic, this is a special episode of Red Connections, one that we did not necessarily plan to do, one that I ad hoc decided I needed to expound upon something that if you're a listener of Guerrilla Radio Show, hopefully you'll have heard by the time this episode comes out, where I briefly speak about the election, and I go over just some of my personal political musings about the entire situation that many people across America are faced with. So before I dive into a more, let's just say, like, before I dive into a more confusing and purely theoretical musing about this election and about what it means for not only you and I as Americans, but as workers, as the proletariat, not only in the United States and in the global North, but for the proletariat across the world. I am personally, I quite strongly believe in internationalism, and I quite strongly believe that the worldwide working class must prevail. I keep that hope within me, and I try to apply it to everything I do. But before I start launching into my tirade that is fueled kind of by quotes, kind of by theory, and kind of by my own personal vitriol against individuals at the top of American society, John, why don't you tell me a little bit about what maybe your personal thoughts are on the election, and maybe we gotta not diatribe too much, but before. But, like, what do you think it means for the future, not only of the American politic writ whole, but the future of the American left?
Well, my primary takeaway from the events of Tuesday night is that as of, I'd say probably about 10 p.m. Eastern Time, I think the entire Democratic National Convention should commit seppuku.
Instead, they said, we gotta get more racist immediately.
They said, we gotta get more racist. I've been seeing so many liberals talking about how much they hate certain demographics.
And how much they'd like to see them removed from American society, which is obviously the old adage of scratch a liberal.
And Hitler bleeds.
Yeah, it's ringing fucking true this week, folks. But I will say in regards to that specifically, there are a lot of people who bought in, I think, to liberal ideology, and they're not Hitler. Like, I don't want to accuse... I also think the left falls into this trap, and they're getting better about not falling into this trap, especially since 2016, of just accusing the American populace of all being Hitler. The American populace writ large is not Hitler. It's a combination of things. First, wildly uneducated. We are just a very uneducated population.
20% of Americans are functionally illiterate.
Yeah, and 50% of Americans are probably, like, functionally incapable of making decisions for themselves most of the time. Not because they're stupid innately, but because they've never been presented with any critical thinking skills in school. And the second piece of this in regards to Americans are uneducated. Even educated Americans are indoctrinated from a very young age by the sham of an education system we do have to believe in the system that we have as the only viable political system. So if you take someone who has a college degree, and they didn't use ChatGPT for the whole thing, and they are capable of critical thought, and many of these people are your friends, your family. They may not be, revolutionary in their politics, but they are liberals, and quite honestly, those are people who could be pushed left. But these are people who are ostensibly quite intelligent, quite capable of critical thought, but they are hemmed in by the world around them. And for a lot of people who make their journey over to the left, it has many causal events. For some, it's a quite traumatic experience at the hands of the state, at the hands of state power, being failed by the state in some way that the contradictions become too obvious to gloss over. In some, it is the oppressive politic of the American family. You may be pushed out in some way by your own family because of politics, and then that's your radicalizing moment. In some cases, it comes all the way from the other side. Guerrilla Radio Show viewers may know this already, may not. I spoke about it probably almost 3 years ago. But up until November 7th, 2016, I was a Republican. I grew up in a household where that was what you were told was the norm. That is what told you made you a good American. And we were supposed to believe in those conservative values, and so I followed them. And it wasn't until the day after the election that I kind of watched it happen, and I skipped a step. I skipped a step that a lot of people on the left do, or that a lot of people on the left don't always skip, which I think has been a boon to me, and in some ways has been harmful to me. I never had a lib phase because I saw this happen, and I had some very wonderful friends around me. Amazing people who, quite honestly, probably saved me from myself, saved me from falling down that pipeline. I was a teenager in 2016, like many people at home listening. My ass was on YouTube. I was going down the fucking pipeline. And they pulled me out. My friends sat me down and they were like, "Hey, this is the reality. We want you to think critically about it. Read this." And in my own quest to prove everybody wrong, I wound up proving myself wrong. And it was a great moment of self-reflection for me. And quite honestly, I have felt a great shame about it ever since. It's why I really do feel a very strong urge to commit myself to revolutionary politics and in some ways right that wrong. Whether that wrong can be righted or whether it's something I need to right, I don't know. But it is something that I work towards every day. I do try to keep myself and my politics and the way I interact with the world, as proletarian first as I can. But to speak to me skipping the lib part, all right? So some of you at home may be going, "Greg, sometimes you come off as a right-winger online." You know what that is, folks? Is I never had a lib phase, and so I'm funny. I'm sorry. Liberals are not funny. A lot of people say the conservatives can't joke, and they can't. But communists can joke, and they're not liberals. So they're just you can just be funny, and it's okay. It's okay because I'm not terminally online, or I wasn't terminally online in the way that many liberals are and were. Nobody ever language policed me, I guess, I'm trying not to, I'm sounding like it right now, but what I mean is if you're at home right now and you're thinking, "Greg, what are your politics?" Well, first off, you're gay. Second off, I am a committed communist devoted to the liberation of the worldwide working class via intersectional class consciousness that transcends all boundaries of race, religion, sex, gender, orientation. I'm probably missing one, but all of it. We should be as intersectional as we can as we build dual power, as we build towards a revolutionary state when the conditions are right. all of us can rise up together. That is my like personal politic. If we're talking theory, John's gonna be real mad at me.
That's spot on. That is
no. I
exactly.
mean, in terms of written down political theory, John's gonna be real mad at me. But I do consider myself a Marxist-Leninist.
And there's a disagreement.
And there's a disagreement, but only one of us has had a state actually coalesce into power. But either way, I try to be critical of Marxism-Leninism. In my own thought, there are many failures associated with Marxism-Leninism. One of the largest is obviously the generation of a gerontocracy and a complacent bureaucratic upper class that eventually led to the stagnation and downfall of the Soviet Union. Although I will say, and I'm going to keep saying this over and over again, there were many attempts by the big names, all right, to prevent this from happening. One of the biggest names that attempted to prevent a gerontocracy from forming might be your personal enemy, hero, or mustache inspiration, Joseph Stalin, who specifically attempted to try and bring young people into the upper echelons of the party and was faced with a massive amount of resistance from the old Bolsheviks.
Yeah, the thing with Stalin is, I think, on an interpersonal level, he was he was an asshole on an interpersonal level. Which so was Lenin. That's not a strike against him. It didn't mean that he was big dick daddy when it comes to intra-party politics, which is why he won the power struggle. And I do think Stalin was he was a true believer, but he was not a very good communist. He also just happened to be the best administrative mind in the old Bolsheviks. He was.
I'm gonna be honest. He is. If we're gonna talk 20th century best administrative minds, and let's transcend politics here for a moment. There's really probably only like 5 guys.
FDR.
Obviously, like in terms of just pure administrative skill, all right, to manage a large economy, a large population, a large military, your best administrative minds were probably FDR, Churchill, Stalin. I'm going to hate to say this, but Chiang Kai-shek was probably a better administrator in terms of handling like the administration of a war than Mao. Mao won the people's minds, which was great. But if you ever read Mao, he shitposted his way to power even more so than Lenin did. And then like outside of that, like the only other administrator like capable of running such a large state, I'm gonna say, and John, this is gonna be a deep cut, is gonna be a toss up for me between Tojo and I can never say his name right. I want to say it's Getulio, but Getulio Vargas of Brazil.
Yes.
Those are some of the great administrators of the 20th century in terms of transforming their states completely.
Yes.
In the case of Churchill, he fucking the British state, but they were all great administrators in their own way. Can I go into my tangent about the election?
Yes.
Before I lose it. So a lot of you at home, I don't know how many people actually listen to this podcast. So all 7 of you at home, might be thinking to yourself, damn, we let a fascist win. That was going to happen either way. Remember that. First, remember that. Second, a conversation I've had with many people who maybe believe themselves to be more radically minded, kind of came into this. There's an explosive contact point. Once we realized, oh no, you're going to lose, huh? A lot of people hit this inflection moment where they didn't. They went down a bad path. Hopefully, many of you can recover from said bad path. Let the shock. This is a bad thing. This is a bad thing. I didn't want the guy to win. All right, let's just make that clear. No leftist, no socialist, no communist wants Donald Trump to win. I think what you have to do if you're going to be a good leftist is think in terms of, do you want anybody in this situation to win? No. Do you want to sign your name necessarily to the bombs being dropped? Now, it doesn't matter who you're voting for, right? You can vote for Kamala. You can vote for Donald. You're signing your name to a bomb dropped on the head of a Palestinian child. That's quite honestly, that's the long and short of it. And that was the seller for me. So I'll tell the audience. I wrote in Yahya Sinwar on my fucking ballot. I am one of 2 people in the entire state of Vermont who did that. And I want to just make clear real quick. You see how I did that, and there were only 2 of us. I didn't make Kamala lose.
Yeah.
The left did not cause this, and so a lot of liberals are already kind of going, "Whoa, the left did this." No. If all the write-ins were counted, or if all of the people who came and filled out a ballot and left President blank, if they were all counted to Kamala, she still would have lost. Let's be honest here. We're gonna have an honest conversation about the state of the left in the United States. The largest left organization that we have is the DSA, followed by the PSL, followed by, I hate to say this, it might be the goddamn American Communist Party. Yeah, those are the 3 largest, ostensibly, left-wing orgs in the country. Now, from those of you at home, the American Communist Party is like, you take all the worst chauvinist pieces of anything that's ever been written down ever, and then call yourself a communist based on that.
They're closer to Mussolini than anything else.
Yeah, they're doing it. They're doing it in real time. They're doing the black shirts in real time. No, never mind to them. We're gonna ignore them. When I say they're the 3rd biggest, it means there's probably 300 of them. So DSA on paper has somewhere between 68,000 and 80,000 paper dues paying members. Those numbers swelled after 2016 to well over 100,000, and then dwindled back down when most people kind of realized, oh, the DSA doesn't fucking do anything. And then the PSL, same idea. Well, the PSL does. The PSL has a party program, which I can respect. They have a party program. They attempt to educate you in a Marxist-Leninist fashion into a cadre. The problem with that is the way that their organization is run. It is not they're necessarily the political line they're trying to follow. It is the way that organization is run. The people who are currently in charge of it are anyway. So on paper, though, the American left numbers less than 250,000, and that's spread out across all 50 states. Now, obviously, do we have sympathizers and supporters who are not paper members of any org? Absolutely. So I'm going to be incredibly generous here. Let's say there's 1.5 million people who identify as a socialist in this country, as a socialist. Right? As a socialist, as a communist, as a Marxist. Not as a progressive. That's not what we're talking about here. Those are liberals. So, even if all of them voted for Kamala, she still would have lost the fucking popular vote, which, if a Democrat loses the popular vote, they lose the Electoral College. That is how this works. They have to win the popular vote to win the Electoral College. The Republicans don't, but that is the way the system works. So, it's not the left's fault. Quite honestly, it is the normal Democratic base who quite honestly did a little bit of an admirable thing here, which is refuse to vote for someone who is perpetrating a genocide and also offers them nothing. The Democratic Party in the United States operates, in my opinion, as a pressure relief valve for the worst urges of the Republican Party, because both parties are the party of capital. They are very much in bed with each other. They understand their power dynamic better than we do, and they know how to continue to advance the interests of the capitalist class because they are one and the same.
Julius Nyeri, I think, has a very good quote about this.
This has come up so many times in the last 3 days. In typical American extravagance, they have 2 of them.
Yeah, America is also one-party state.
Yeah.
In American extravagance, we have 2 of them.
So the way it works is the Republicans are... First, I'm going to just make a statement that's going to make me sound like a mouse, but they're all fascists, okay? All of them are, whether they realize it or not, ideologically, they are fascists. Some of them are just queer-coded fascists. That doesn't make you not a fascist. Let's just make that clear. Some of the history's most brutal, monstrous fascists were queer people. All right? Like, they're not mutually exclusive. That's a specific to certain countries, certain times, certain periods where, like, that's the and it did bite them all in the ass. Let's also make that clear. What the hell is his name? Ernst Röhm, known gay man, he started the fucking SA. All right, for those of you at home, just Google the fucking SA Germany 1920s. There you go. Not going into that any further, but like you can be a queer-coded fascist. When the Republicans ratchet things too far too fast, the Democrats operate as a pressure relief valve where they can campaign against those things, get elected in a landslide, and then instead of reversing those things, all right, they just simply do nothing and let the pressure die down. And then when the pressure builds too high within the Democrat side of the system, the Democrats have their own relief valve. And you may know him. He's my senator. It's people like Bernie Sanders who operate as a pressure relief valve for the Democrats as the Democrats' base, which is ostensibly not fascists, right? We're going to just operate on the premise that the people are not fascists. So when those people go, you don't do anything. Why don't you ever do anything? I keep voting for you. Do something. They go, we need a progressive leader in our party. We need someone who can actually represent us and actually advance the interests of the average liberal's understanding of what the working class is. Now, in most cases, this just means the white working class, and it means a very small...
Or, quote-unquote, the people.
Yeah, and it means a very small sliver of said white working class that we have identified in liberal democracies as the middle class. So that's kind of, like, that's who Bernie represents. So Bernie will then go, yes, I'm going to push a policy, or yes, I'll run for president. And then all of that pressure can get pushed into him, pushed into his campaigns. And then once the steam is starting to get a little slower, the Democrats can shut down whatever he's doing. They can shut it down, and then now the pressure has been released from the system. It started out with the Republicans doing something that is like quite extreme, quite fascist, and it gets pushed all the way across to someone like Bernie, and the pressure gets pushed down. That is how the American political system works. Before it was Bernie, it was what the hell is his goddamn name?
God, I'm trying to remember. It's not Scoop Jackson.
No, it's not Scoop Jackson. Well, I mean, sometimes I'm gonna have to make a caveat here, but it's not really a caveat. When the pressure builds too great, America has this a little quirk where it'll generate a third party for like a single election cycle. So before this, it was, and while he was but like it was Ross Perot, and it was what the hell's the governor? Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura for a while was the pressure relief valve because like I sometimes I hate to say this, but Jesse Ventura was one of the better American politicians of like the 20th and early 21st centuries.
That's how bad it is.
Yeah, but he did pretty cool.
He's a cool guy, but like,
yeah, that's the best we can do. So now that you have a bit of an overview of like kind of how like at a big level, that's how the pressure system works in America. It's also why Kamala lost the popular vote. However, protections for women's reproductive health care, in some cases this also kind of covers queer health care. Those passed by fucking Assad margins in incredibly conservative states.
Yeah.
Abortion is popular. It's also why the Republican Party, including Donald Trump, did not campaign on that. They did not campaign on their quote-unquote victory. They did not campaign on continuing those things. They did not campaign on pushing it further because even they know that that is a losing issue. And because they are the party of capital, because they need to generate revenue along with their political endeavors, it's not a moneymaker to come out against those things because half of the population is women and they can vote. So it's not worth you pushing it any further than you already have. The Democrats, on the other hand, they didn't know what to campaign on. They kind of campaigned on Bad Man up at the top of the hill. He's up there. Vote for us because Bad Man. But I think the majority of the American population, for how uneducated they are, they're not stupid. And a lot of them made while this is incorrect, they made a logical assumption here, which is nothing really changed for the average American the first time. All right. And eggs were $2 cheaper, right?
Yeah.
That's all they're thinking. And I spoke briefly about this a little bit with one of my friends today, and you can tell me if you agree with me because you like. I talked to Alex about it. We had him on for the RAF episode.
Yeah.
You can tell me if you agree because you are also a well-read, like a well-read communist.
Yeah.
It is my personal conclusion, my opinion, that when he's inaugurated, prices will go down. Not because anything is changing economically, but because the capitalist class is in league with fascism as a way to generate revenue and increase exploitation. Part of the reason prices went up and stayed up and then continue to climb, still outpacing inflation, is this price cut that I personally think will come over the next year is priced in. The capitalist class is in collusion. I mean, the minute it was announced that Donald won, the stock market goes whoop.
Oh my God, yeah.
And the entire time that he was president, despite the economic reality on the ground, the market did incredibly well. He had one of the best performing markets of any American president ever. And that's not because his policy was good or great or even really understandable most of the time. It's because if let's say you're Walmart, and you want to vertically integrate one of your production chains. Let's say, Walmart has its own brand of TVs, the TCL TVs. That's a Walmart brand TV. They're not making them. They're not building the TV. It's outsourced. But if they want to own that, right? Let's say there's a giant brand new lithium deposit in fucking Arkansas, and you need to be able to pass a fucking rule that says I can fucking Walmart, because we have rules against vertical integration. So let's say Walmart they want to open the lithium mine, they want to start making their own batteries, they're going to start making goddamn iPhones. I don't care. You need to get the fascists in power, because fascism is sometimes a misnomer for someone from who's not a goddamn dork like us. It is at its essence, it is corporatism. It was described by in the kind of founding documents of fascism in Italy in the 1920s as a merger of corporate interests and gilded interests. Now, yes, guilds don't necessarily exist anymore, and that is a very European and very outdated term. But what you can think of it as is it's a merger between actual big businesses and the goddamn Small Business Association. That's what a guild is. It's the Small Business Association. It's your local Better Business Bureau. It's shit like that. But in this case, they have power. So to support fascism, corporate interests must do things that make fascism attractive. Because at a base level, most Americans, and that does not mean 80%, I'm saying 55% of Americans don't necessarily want to see their neighbor from Mexico deported, right? They might know him, their kids go to school with him, they're friends, maybe their kids have dated each other, who knows, right? They're regular Americans for the fucking most part who don't want to see these things. But if you can pump enough propaganda into this already uneducated person's head that your neighbor from Mexico, he came here and he took a manufacturing job from you. Now, mind you, manufacturing jobs have been gone since NAFTA, but he took a manufacturing job from you, he took a construction job from you, he took something from you that you can never get back. Well, you're going to go, well, yeah, get him the fuck out of here. Fascism operates on scapegoats. For the Nazis, this was Jews. For the Italians, it was Libyans. It was Ethiopians. It was the West writ large. It was the English. It was the Yugoslavs. They had outgroups. They create those outgroups and then they persecute them. For the Romanians, it was the Roma. Every fascist movement have an outgroup that they specifically target. The United States, in typical American extravagance, has multiple. Okay? So, in America, we have a few different outgroups that the fascist right can kind of push against and target as the reason things are quote-unquote bad. Number one is Mexico. The country, the people, the culture. All of that, conservatives fucking hate it, all right? The fascist right, that's their main scapegoat. Now, in the last 10 years, they've invented a few new scapegoats. Among them, women crazy decision on their part, by the way. Like, one of the least politically fucking, like, minded choices they could make, but now they've doubled down. And third is it's granular. It's not gay people. It's trans people, which for many of you at home who are incredibly fucking hyper online, you're going to go, I know like 30 trans people. Okay, you know like all 30 trans people in your state. All right? This is a subset of the population that is like 0.01% of 1%. Like there are not that many trans people in America. I mean, and that's not like a good or a bad thing. It's just, in terms of numbers, they make up an incredibly small part of the population. But if the fascists can create a scapegoat, and especially because, like all marginalized groups, they congregate with one another. If you can show enough footage of this, you can go, oh my God, there's a fucking army of them, and they're making the kids gay. That's how you create another scapegoat. And this just kind of keeps building upon itself. And it's one of the biggest reasons why, in the wake of this election, there's been a split, not only amongst liberals, right, ostensibly liberals, but also, at least in my own observation, John, you can please chime in, but also amongst the queer community, who have taken one of two paths. First path is, I'm just gonna kind of call it what it is. They're having a Trump 2016 meltdown. Okay, They feel abandoned, and they rightfully so. They feel abandoned, they feel betrayed, and they feel like the average American sat at home and chose Palestine over them. And then there's a second contingent. Well, I'm going to call this the Marxist contingent, because they are thinking in a more class-conscious way, where the people of Palestine asked Americans to not vote for Kamala. They asked us to stay home. They did a very cold, hard, truthful calculation. Because if we truly believe in harm reduction as Marxists, right, and this is debatable for for Marxists to say, I believe in harm reduction, I don't. But if we want to like truly lower the amount of suffering in the world, right, liberals love to say harm reduction, so we're going to use their terminology. They made a calculation, as bombs fell on their family's head, that what is worse? And this is a hard conversation to have, and I want to acknowledge my position of privilege in this matter. I am a straight white man. I have immense privilege. Decisions made do not always affect me, and I will always have a better chance of getting out of a bad situation than someone who is marginalized. Let's make that incredibly clear. The Palestinians, American socialists, Western socialists, people who just hate genocide in general, which is most people, did some cold calculations, which is, if we let Trump win, this sucks, but the war's probably going to end sooner, okay? Because Bibi wants to be friends with Donald, and part of the reason he's kept the war going is to make Kamala lose, okay? The Palestinians are asking us to not vote. If there's in America 700,000 trans people, and then if in America with 0 abortion protections, we're going to have to make up some numbers here because I don't know them off the top of my head, but let's say I'm going to try and overestimate. If abortion was completely outlawed in the United States, let's say that kills between 50,000 and 100,000 women every year. And then let's just make the cold, this is not my personal opinion, let's say all those trans people die. So that now we're at like 800,000 people in 1 year die. Okay? Is it more or less harmful to say we should protect those people, or should we let all remaining 10 million or so Palestinians die? That's the calculation. That's just the on it. That's what the calculation is as harm reduction. I mean, John, I can see you making a face. I don't want to explain.
I'll let you finish.
Poorly. I don't want to explain this poorly, but what I'm saying is from a harm reduction standpoint, not my personal opinion, folks. I'm going to say my personal opinion is that if you lived in a swing state, you should have voted for Kamala. And I know that sucks. And I know that sucks because there is no pushing Kamala left. There was no pushing the Democrats left. They were going to continue to abet and abet genocide. But that's the hardcore, like, people made that decision. I personally made that decision because I knew I was in a state that Kamala was safe to win, so it was safe for me to use my vote as protest.
Likewise.
So it is not good or bad. Neither decision is good or bad. They are decisions you make. Some people may think they're more principled than others. Some people may think they're performing a harm reduction of some type. It can go either way. What we do have to remember, though, and this is my personal opinion. This part is my personal opinion. Even in a worst case scenario, the material conditions of people in the United States, of all backgrounds, of all identities, is better than the material conditions of the people of Palestine. Full stop. That's my personal opinion on that. So that's part of why I did what I did. That's part of why I voted the way I voted. And I think, obviously, the Democrats never learn. But if they learn that nobody will vote for them, if they continue on their path, there's a hope that the party itself can die and a new party can rise in its place.
Yeah, that's the Democratic National Convention must die. I think that is like the prime takeaway from this election is the Democrats have got to go. At least as they currently exist, they have to go. I honestly, I don't know if this is what you were saying, but I do not think Palestine was decisive in this election. I think what the
I don't think it was decisive. I think it was a big enough.
It lost in Michigan, absolutely.
It lost in Michigan and it lost in Pennsylvania. So in that, it might be decisive.
It might,
but it's not decisive.
I haven't seen the polling out of Pennsylvania. Did it lose in Pennsylvania?
They lost Pennsylvania by less than 100,000 votes.
That might have done it.
And I also, I want to say for like liberals who are like blaming the left specifically for like people not voting because of the Palestine issue, that has and should, much like apartheid did for Americans, transcended political party and kind of transcended your, like, many people's personal ideologies, because across the board, even among populations that are fascists, like, war is never popular, and genocide even less so. There is a reason that it takes a specific kind of sick political structure, leadership, and propaganda to entice a people into genocide and then to keep them doing it for a while. There's a reason, in Eastern Europe, up until the Russian Revolution, pogroms were a thing, and they would go for like a day before the people perpetrating it also came to that same conclusion. Like, this is not to humanize those people. They're bastards. I hope they're all rotting in hell. But that's like, war and death are not popular things.
They're not good for the brain.
No, they're incredibly traumatic. It is why the Germans moved to gas chambers. It is why the Israelis do most of their stuff from the air.
There's a reason why the Carnation Revolution happened in Portugal. There's a reason why apartheid collapsed, like in South Africa. It's not popular.
Yeah, I do want to make clear, like, the West ostensibly did a good thing with South Africa by cutting them off from the rest of the world. But South Africa didn't fall because of that. Like, the apartheid party did not fall because of that. They fell for the reason that all fascist regimes eventually collapse. It is hyperextension of a military-industrial complex that needs to constantly feed death and constantly pursue the outgroup until such a point that the home front is completely exhausted and they don't necessarily come to their senses and realize that the fascism is bad, but they can't handle the war economy anymore. There's a reason Germany is so fucked up still, why Japan is so fucked up still. It's because the fascist death drive is still there. We didn't denazify those places. but the commitment to war, and that echo into the modern day, that commitment to that war and what it did to the home front and what it did to the in-group is what prevents those things from happening again. Without Marxist education, those things continue to happen over and over and over again. It is why, and it is a failure of the Soviet Union, in my personal opinion, to not fully denazify and not fully eradicate any forms of reaction within the Eastern Bloc. If it were up to me, there would have been no Comintern. There would have been Soviet military occupation indefinitely, and then a subsumption into the Soviet Union itself. By giving those Eastern nations nominal independence and nominal control over what they did, and in most regards, contrary to popular belief and pop history on this matter, the majority of the Eastern Bloc did follow its own completely independent policy. They attempted to build socialism with the assistance of the Soviet Union, but to their own goals.
Economically, they were much, much closer to the developmentalist regimes in like early 20th century Latin America. And there's this whole thing. I wrote a paper about this in college. There was this the Soviets after the Cuban Missile Crisis, they tried to basically economically integrate all of the Warsaw Pact countries. Problem is, all of these countries loved autarky. They all wanted to be completely economically independent, and so the Soviets trying to get them to coordinate their economies was like pulling teeth. Which is, and so they, I think, if I remember right, by the mid-70s, they just kind of gave up and just said, fine,
they kind of gave up. I mean, in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, by the time, who the fuck was in between Khrushchev and Brezhnev?
No one. Brezhnev, Khrushchev.
No, I thought there was somebody. There was like an interim. There was a guy there.
There was a troika that Brezhnev was a member of.
Yes, by the time of the troika, though, that was it.
Yeah,
like the Soviet, and by that point, also the Soviet Union had spelled its own doom by failing to, quite honestly, codify a constitutional process for the transfer of power between leadership figureheads. Because I also do want to say, in contrast to a lot of what other pieces of leftism may believe, and obviously what the left believes, like, this might not be true later on, but like Stalin was not a dictator.
Yeah.
He was the chairman of the party. He was in charge of the party.
Yeah.
And he did not get to make unilateral, much like the president of the United States, the only real unilateral decision-making he ever made while in power was during the Second World War.
Yeah.
Outside of that, he functioned much like the president of the U.S. He was beholden to his legislature. Later on, as the gerontocracy stratified, especially in the wake of Stalin's death, yes, it became more and more kind of like a true dictatorship, but lacking the cult of personality that early 20th century dictatorships did have.
Yeah, Stalin, whenever I say Stalin or whenever Greg says Stalin, add click to the end of that, like kind of hyphenated. Like, Stalin wasn't a dictator, but he was the head of like the ruling clique inside the CPSU.
Yeah, we might disagree here, just on a
part of the clique that like took over, that eventually became the CPSU out of the shell of the All Union Communist Party. Yeah, I have like some weird crank theories about like my historiography of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, but that's another episode.
Yeah, but anyway, the point we're making here is I don't remember, but the problem is that the way the American political system is structured, there is no option for you or me, right? And there is no option for the majority of Americans. It's why our elections have fucking 40% turnout at best. The gripe you should have, if you're somehow a liberal listening to this podcast and you've made it 46 minutes in, is not with me. It is not with anyone who chose not to vote. That is their personal choice. And goddamn it, you liberals who love to talk about how it's your goddamn God-given right, and it's your civic duty to go vote. Well, I'm going to go fill out the ballot for candidates in my local races who will continue to protect the rights and freedoms of the people in my life who need that protection most. But I will, by God, not put my fucking name on a bomb that kills a child in Palestine. I will not. I have seen far too many of them destroyed in a way that you cannot put into words, nor do I need to describe for you here.
One video is too many.
One is too many. But the point I'm making is this election is an inflection point, not only for the Democratic Party, who will learn nothing from this. Mark my fucking words. They will learn nothing from this, and they will run Josh Shapiro for fucking president in 4 years. All right? Or they'll run Gruesome Gavin, all right, who will do his own home front genocide by killing every homeless person within 10,000 nautical miles of the U.S. coast. Do not give him your vote either. Okay, do not give the next guy your vote. Don't give fucking Tim Walz your fucking vote if that's who they decide to trot out there, because he was on TV last week talking about the need to expand Israeli borders. All right, if we want to be the international working class, if we want to be a part of it, we need to act in solidarity with the entire world's working class. And for many of you at home, you don't always understand what that is. I don't always understand what that is. I don't always know what defines it. We are the richest country in the history of ever. All right? Our working class could and would live like kings in the majority of the world. Our poorest citizens would make up the 1% in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Vietnam, in Laos, in India, in Pakistan, anywhere, they would be the 1% of the 1%. You need to start looking after the needs, rights, and freedoms of people who have nothing. The reason this country does not suffer from an endless series of military coups d'etats, juntas, and civil insurrections is because the American people have far too much to lose. The material conditions are not right for, an insurrection, right? So while I am about to say something incredibly controversial for Marxists around the world who have argued about this since 1878, sometimes a little acceleration is good for the overall socialist project, but only if we are actually trying to build a parallel structure of power while we are attempting to accelerate the deterioration of material conditions under capitalism.
The all under heaven is in chaos. The situation is excellent.
Exactly.
I think back to your point about prices from like half an hour ago.
This has been very rambling.
I think prices are going to drop for the first month or two, and then the tariffs will hit.
I don't think he's going to do them.
The guy he's appointed to whatever the office is, I forget exactly. The guy he appointed to the relevant office is a tariff hawk.
Can I say something that is going to be even more controversial and is going to lead us into a spiral of we're just going to make up scenarios in our head and talk about them?
Yeah, sure. Fuck it.
If he implements tariffs, first off, I'm going to start this off with the first part of the thought so that it tracks chronologically. The conditions have been set, and it is my personal belief that the majority of the pieces are in motion for a third world war.
Yep.
Now, I am going to follow that up with, if we implement the tariffs, that third world war will begin in earnest before 2028. Because, and we're not, and I'm just going to say this right now, we ain't fucking winning another one.
We don't have it.
We have hollowed ourselves out. There is no there's no slack in the American military industrial complex. This is not like when we entered World War I, and people don't talk about this, but we had military production slack because we had just fought the goddamn Spanish Empire in 1898. All right? And we don't talk that obviously World War II, we had empty fucking factories sitting there because of the Great Depression that we were able to immediately convert into military production. And then Korea living off the surplus of that. And then Vietnam living off of that because of the Great Society continuing to pump up industrialization in the United States for just a little bit longer. By Desert Storm, by Iraq, by Afghanistan, that's gone. We were giving soldiers in Desert Storm Vietnam-era rations. We were giving soldiers in Afghanistan up until Biden pulled out Desert Storm rations. We've been living off the same pile of Purple Hearts since fucking Okinawa. There's no more slack. And if we were truly approaching a true global conflagration, a true global catastrophe, it's either going to be started because Israel drops the bomb, all right, on someone, probably Iran. Who knows? Maybe they detonate over Iraq. I don't know what they're going to do. It's either that, it's South Korea feels emboldened, does something to North Korea, kicks something off. Or it'll be over the goddamn Strait of Taiwan. Because Donald Trump is a fucking war hawk for that. And God knows Bolton's going to be fucking somewhere. But we would not win. It would look like we're winning for a little while. But the same with the tariffs. If we do the fucking tariffs, okay, there's going to be two things that happen. First, prices will shoot up. Second, it will act as a repudiation of NAFTA, which will reindustrialize areas of the United States that have the slack capacity and the workforce that has just simply not done anything since 1992. Okay? However, it will very quickly become apparent that we lack a technical expertise, the wages, and the union structure that held that together. What will then happen is we'll try and repeal those tariffs. And we will. The tariffs will get repealed. But China's not going to want to do business with us. And for good reason. Because the minute we fucking jack up the tariffs, guess what China gets to do? All that slack industrial capacity that they have producing tchotchkes for us, they can turn into more useful shit because they're already the most goddamn productive nation on earth. Okay? If it were to lead to war, not only do they have a manpower advantage, they've rapidly closed the technological gap in terms of military technology on the United States, and they surpassed us 25 years ago in industrial capacity. Their fucking purchasing power per capita may be lower, but it doesn't matter. This is just like the Soviet Union in the Second World War. Everybody was dirt poor, but they were turning out 10,000 T-34s a day. We would not win that conflict. We can't keep the goddamn ships we have now from being rusty, all right? Which, quite honestly, for any Navy, should be a fucking embarrassment. But 20 years ago, the Chinese had tanks strapped onto junks, and that was their Navy. And now they've got nuclear fucking missiles, and they have a fleet that rivals the United States. It took them 20 years. It took us 100 years and constantly deactivating, reactivating ships from World War II. It's the only reason we got enough shit we got, all right? We don't produce enough munitions to fully stock those ships, and we completely lack the ability to scale up production of those. We don't have the technicians. We don't have the skill. We don't have the goddamn parts. The goddamn parts come from China.
The Chinese do have a couple very key choke points, I guess, in their production. I don't know if that's the right term. Like, they still can't make their own jet engines because building a domestic jet industry is like several times harder than a nuclear bomb.
Absolutely, but they get them from Russia.
Yeah. The
Russians are having a goddamn banner year. Okay. Not only do they get a free hand to win their war in Ukraine, which also means they get a lot of their own excess slack production back that they had when they owned Ukraine. Okay?
Yeah.
They have spent the last 3 years now revitalizing their entire economy based around this war, obviously. But the goddamn golden inheritance of the Soviet Union that Russia was handed in terms of industrial capacity, which has lain dormant and rotting for 20 years, has been brought back online.
At least in part.
At least in part. This is a
still
country,
think
though.
that the Soviet Union, like the Russian Federation now, is still just like a pale shadow, like industrially and militarily.
Yes, but the cruel joke is that all of us are.
That's true. That is true.
The American shadow lies long across the world, but it is not a tall building. The sun is setting. You guys can't see this at home, but John's holding up a copy of The Long 20th Century.
We need to do a book club episode about this in addition to Hinterland, which I also have right here.
We do. I need to read Hinterland. I like to come to my conclusions myself, and then somebody in a book tells me they already thought of it. But
I am going to read the last paragraph of this as my closer for the episode, because I think it's very relevant.
But yeah, like the American, like look at our own military. Like if you're at home and you're like, oh, we're the biggest military on earth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we just have the numbers. We're not like it's not like we're building new things and replacing old things very quickly. We're doing it, but we're not doing it much faster than like the Russians are. Like we're building like fucking a dozen F-35s a year. The Russians are projecting they're going to build, 25, 30 Su-57s a year. Now they have a lot more airplanes to replace, but like that's more than us. Mostly because the Soviet Union was so goddamn good at building a production line, which they learned from Ford, which America clearly has forgotten.
Yeah.
But
meanwhile, we're turning the Marines into fucking Tropical Island Hezbollah.
The Hamas of Hawaii.
But I mean, like militarily, that is what the Marines are reforming towards, like small mobile squads meant to do hit and run asymmetric warfare.
Yeah, and that's the reality of not. It's not the reality of modern war as Ukraine has taught us.
The reality of modern war is like halfway between the Battle of the Somme and like the fucking that one bit in the Animatrix.
Yeah, like modern warfare is to put it in real life terms, John, is a combination of World War I and like Call of Duty. Like it is
like advanced warfare.
Yeah. As we've seen, the mass maneuver of the 20th century, that's gone just due to the surveillance state that exists in all major industrialized powers. However, Blitzkrieg seems to be back in a big way, followed up by slow, entrenched warfare. It's just high-tech trench warfare. That's what we're doing. That's why the Russian advance is so slow, even though on paper they're a far superior fighting force. Trench warfare takes a fucking long time. It took 4.5 years to beat Germany in World War I, even though they were probably outmatched by 1915.
I don't know. The Kaiserlicht offensive was close. The only issue is that it didn't have any actual real objectives. They just broke the line, just went, fuck, we didn't expect to do this well.
Yeah, well, it's like battles 3 through 13 of the Isonzo.
Yeah.
Like, but that's kind of what we're looking at here. And, if America gets into a war like that, do you think, first off, the military has come out and said multiple times now, the average American is too fat and mentally ill to fucking be drafted. Okay.
Well, I also don't think that the military has infrastructure to handle a draft again. I think if we do the draft again, I think that's because Vietnam got us this close to a Russian army in 1917 situation.
No, I think it got us this close to a Carnation Revolution.
Yeah, I mean, like the Pentagon was making that comparison internally, like, oh shit.
I think if we really were to implement the draft, we all sign those goddamn selective service cards. First off, you guys come for me. I'm 26 years old. If you're coming for me, man, you didn't get. If you need to draft a 26-year-old, it's already fucking over. And I'm going into the woods, and I'm gonna.
I'm cutting that.
Yeah, like our volunteer army is so fucking small now. Like we have a professional fighting force, but it is quite small. It could man a section of front maybe 100 miles long in Ukraine. Like that's what we got. Now we got an air force to rival every other air force on Earth. We have the first, second, and third largest air forces on the planet, but we don't really have enough missiles to put on every plane, or enough pilots,
Well,
or
also, what Ukraine and Gaza has taught us is that air powers for colonial peacekeeping and actual war is all on the ground.
yeah. I mean, that's the other thing is the
Because the
Soviet.
Russian and Ukrainian air forces mulched each other within the first, 2 weeks.
Yeah, I will say the legacy of the Soviet Union, and this is Russia's. I want to talk about Russia's attempt at using the air force as a domineering force in the beginning of Ukraine, because in my opinion, that was Russia. They had to learn the hard way because they attempted to be a Western style air force,
Yes.
which they are not. Soviet Air Force was not designed to be an offensive air force. It was designed to be a defensive air force that existed to provide defensive firepower by destroying incoming aircraft without going over enemy territory.
Well, also providing tactical aviation support for ground forces.
Yes. The American Air Force is a goofy expeditionary force that since Vietnam hasn't had an opposing force that actually does anything.
Yeah, and that kept the Army from getting a dedicated anti-air system below the corps level, because they got all hissy because by the implication that they wouldn't do their jobs.
Yeah, and that's kind of my other point is that an air war, a true air war between whether it be American-Chinese confrontation or a joint confrontation between the Chinese and the Russians and the United States, um, the Soviet legacy of just going, well, they probably either going to have more or better airplanes than us, so let's just build the best anti-aircraft missile we fucking can, and then they did that, and they keep doing that, and they are still the S-500 system is still far better than any anti-air system like the West produces because the West operates on the assumption we are going to destroy enemy emplacements, and the East is operating on the assumption of we're going to shoot them down before they get here.
Yeah.
So a true air engagement probably wouldn't happen. I think in the first few weeks of a conflict, it would be much like Ukraine and Russia, where they do kind of just mulch each other kind of immediately. And then I think we would see a pretty rapid, what in my opinion would feel like a regression in terms of like air-to-air conflict, where it would start looking more like Vietnam. Because we're not going to be able to, nobody can. The Chinese can't even fucking do this with their massive industrial capacity. Can't produce enough air-to-air missiles fast enough. You're just going to see the reintroduction of like fewer missiles per aircraft and the reintroduction of the gun.
Yeah.
Because it is far easier, and you will see and this is why Russian pilots, Chinese pilots are trained differently than American pilots. That maverick mentality of Top Gun, that's how the Air Force works. Is like you are supposed to be a solo. You need to be thinking about keeping you and your aircraft alive and winning it all by yourself.
Fascist heroism.
Exactly, and Eastern Air Force is like one of the big complaints of Russian pilots having to operate like a Western Air Force is that their command and control system, literally on board their aircraft, it's not designed for that. They had worse radars in the aircraft because they were supposed to be controlled from the ground. The ground is supposed to tell them where the target is, where to aim the missile, do it. Whereas Western Air Forces, they're supposed to operate independently because they are expeditionary forces. They're supposed to be hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, beyond AWACS. The Eastern Air Forces are not designed to be that way. Anyway, back to my original point. If tariffs go through, World War III will happen. It's already happening. This is, in my opinion, like Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine, Russia. It feels like Manchuria. It feels like Manchuria. And what was that? 1933?
1936, I want to say. 1933.
No, 36 was the invasion of China proper.
33, I think, was Manchuria.
Okay. Yeah, like it feels like this is Manchuria.
This is like the low boil prelude.
Yeah, like this is like something's happening, but nobody really knows what. And I think once, maybe, if it ever happens, nothing ever happens. Something has to happen to Iran, I think, to maybe kick it up a notch. But who knows? Nothing ever happens, so everything could just simmer back down.
What I think might end up happening is it's going to be like the 30 Years' War, where like it's not so much everything bleeds into one conflict. It's just like there's just back to back to back conflicts that happen that are overlapping, are nominally separate, but have a lot that share a lot of combatants.
Yeah, I do also think the other possible flashpoint that we don't talk about enough is the Baltics.
Yeah.
And this is not going to be the Russians' fault. Mark my words, this is not the Russians' fault. It's that the Estonians are getting a little too fucking trigger happy. And they're going to do something, and the Russians are going to flatten them, and then someone's going to invoke Article 5.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the point of the Baltics is to buy NATO another 20 minutes at most. Like,
yeah, it buys them like a day in their war games, like a day. The Estonian the regular Estonian military is like 1,600 guys.
Why are you? What I don't get is why they love NATO so much when they're like
fascist
openly...
death drive.
Yeah,
and also because they're onion and slop eating Hungarians who have polished the cocks of German horses for 1,000 years.
Yeah. All right. I love doing variants of that copy pasta for different like I did one for like Greece versus the Achaemenid Empire. Atticans are honey and barley slop eating barbarians who have yet to be uplifted to sapience.
But no, that's like they're like the Baltics are fascist countries.
Yeah.
They're just, and the liberals are so stupid. If the whole country's white and they're doing fascism, they're like, this isn't fascism. Look how nice of a society they've built. It's just all built on fascism, though. They're just doing fascism, and their outgroup just happens to be other white people, so, like, American liberals don't even notice it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so whose side you picking in World War III? Because President Xi, please liberate my my hometown.
I'm choosing the international proletariat.
Well, me too, but President Xi, please send 12 Dongfang missiles.
Yeah. I mean, like, I've said this a lot, but I'm seeing liberals on my timeline saying that Xi is our only hope left.
I know, and I'm it's a little glimmer of hilarious hope because Xi is a liberal.
Yeah, he is. He's like a
write that down, Maoists.
He is Xi Jinping and the modern CPC and PRC are like the last remnant of like weird national Jacobinite third way developmentalism.
They just continue doing the New Deal.
Yeah,
no, they're just doing the New Deal.
One of my friends said that like Xi Jinping and the modern CPC is like if you sent FDR back in time to run the Gilded Age Republican Party.
That's actually a good analysis.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the Chinese lost the plot a while ago.
Well, I don't know if they lost the plot. Their entire point of the Communist Party's project since 1949 has not been communism. It has been, well, it hasn't been directly communism. At first, it's arguable that they were doing this as a prerequisite to communism, but their entire project is, I'm going to plug Chong's Sorghum Steel and Red Dust. It's been so China before 1949 did not have a single national economy. It was like a series of like archipelagos. Like there was like the weird Japanese developmentalist like industrial nightmare realm up in the north. There was like a couple like inland like industrial enclaves like Chongqing and Wuhan, and then like the port cities along the south. And each of these was like a different economic zone and a different economy. And what the Chinese project has been for the last 50 years has been knitting all that into one economy. And they finally did it in like 2012.
Yeah. And I don't know what the future of the party is, and nobody can really say that for sure. Do they have a party that ostensibly wants to build socialism? Yes. Are they doing it? I don't know. I'm not
They're building the conditions for it.
They are building the conditions for it, and they are killing billionaires, so I'm still cool with them.
Long live the butcher Xi, who works in spite of himself for the global proletariat revolution.
Yeah, like and there's so much other historical context that, like, you know, as a Westerner, I don't fully get. There's I don't want to quote the Shen Yun billboard, but there's 10,000 years of history there that I don't understand, nor do I have the cultural lens to fully understand, even if I read every book under the sea.
Modern China is like only
Hey,
10,000 years old.
That's what the goddamn Shen Yun billboard says.
Well, it's Shen Yun.
That's why I said I hate to quote Shen Yun. What I'm saying, though, is like the idea of a Chinese state is like thousands of years old.
The Qin Shi Huang was, if I remember right, either right before or contemporaneous with Alexander the Great. So it's newer than
that's 2,000 years ago.
3,000 years ago, yeah. It's more like 2,500.
Yeah, that's thousands.
It's old, but it's not as old as a lot of people think.
No, but like also the idea of China as an idea, I don't have the Eastern cultural lens to understand.
I'm gonna plug the Tides of History episodes about Shang Dynasty China here, because they are genuinely in the formation of the first states along the Yellow River. Genuinely fascinating stuff. I'm gonna plug that.
I would say like the idea of China, like the Eight Kingdoms is like that's China.
Yeah.
The Warring States period that's China, and that's like that is the origin point of like the continuous formation and implosion of Chinese states for the next 2,500 years.
Yeah.
It was like it's still based around those original regions. They've shifted, but it's still like that's why the breakdown. That's why the economies are never knitted together, and that's why it wasn't. That's why in the wake of the Qing, China imploded into like 9 different polities.
9 is being generous. Is probably more like a dozen.
Yeah, but I'm gonna not count the tiny ones. I'm gonna say the big ones.
Yeah, fair enough.
But also the the Chinese nation state, as we understand it today, is like it's an invention of Sun Yat-sen. It's not Chiang, it's not Mao. Like that, both of them committed ideologues of their own, but they wouldn't have. Sun Yat-sen created like China as we understand it.
China as a national category instead of a like geographic one.
Yeah, because previous to this, white people are racist, but everybody from that wasn't Indian but lived in Asia was Chinese.
People who lived under the direct administration of the emperor, because the emperor was considered to be like the world sovereign.
Yeah,
just he sometimes delegated to other sovereigns.
There's like the Chinese tributary system, which included most of Southeast Asia, Japan for a while, Korea, up into the tribal areas like Siberia. Like that's all, even into Central Asia. That's all like they were all under the administration of like the Ming Dynasty, ostensibly. But we're getting off the plot again. So the American election. For those of you at home who are following this at all, Donald Trump. If Donald Trump implements tariffs, it is my opinion that we will see a third world war in a true way before the decade is out. I don't think that there's a way to. I don't think there's a way to avoid a worldwide conflict of some sort at all anymore. I think the Pax Americana, it's over, because I think you could make the argument that Desert Storm, Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, all that shit that happened in the 80s, up into now, that's part of Pax Americana. That is the great American peace. We offshored war. We made war a second thought. That's over. Mostly because America is losing its hegemon status and no empire goes quietly into the good night.
Empires do not break easily. They do not break clean.
They do not break peacefully, period. I mean, I can't think of an empire that really dissolved like peacefully. You could make the argument the British Empire did so, but they did it to fight World War II for that. For that to happen, for the conditions for the British Empire.
The best case scenario might be the Soviet Union, and that was a nightmare. Like
best case scenario, we dissolve like the Soviet Union did. We don't have We don't have the. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
far bloodier.
Yeah.
And really though, like this we are in the death throes. In my opinion, I think the American state comes out the other side as a state.
Yeah.
Just incredibly diminished. Like I hate this. If you're at home and you are, I'm sorry for this comparison, but we'll be like, it's like a Brazil.
Yeah.
Like we'll be relegated to second-rate power status indefinitely because we cannot overcome our internal problems.
I don't know about, by indefinitely, I agree for like maybe another 150 years.
Indefinitely in terms of our lifespans.
Yeah, we're going to have, I think the United States, as long as there's a unified polity in the middle latitudes of North America, I think that's going to be the case more often than not, long term. It is going to have an outsized presence on the world stage.
Look, I ain't dying with a Social Security check in my bank. Yeah, I ain't dying with a Social Security check in my bank account is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I do think that there is a possibility America balkanizes, and I do have to say, not to postulate too far and start talking about alternative theories here, that like we're getting far outside the realm of what's possible or what could happen, and I'm really just postulating. But I like not to be the West is fallen, Wojak, but if the American state does reach a crisis point like that, and we do get involved in a global military conflict that we eventually figure out that we can't win, there is always the worst case option, which is that we do go full Hitler, because if Hitler had the big red button, he would have pushed it.
Yeah.
And we could press the big red button and just take everybody down with us. Although I do think that if we push the big red button, I don't think anybody would shoot back. Not because they'd be gone, but because our adversaries in this conflict are on the right side of history, which is a weird thing to say as the person living in the country that's on the wrong side of history, but our adversaries in this conflict are on the right side of history.
I've maybe their counter-hegemonic status puts them there, but I don't think like Russian revanchism is on the right side of history.
No. But much like the United States was on the right side of history in World War II as a bad actor.
Yeah.
Like, I think maybe they'll shoot back a little bit, but I think the understanding that if everybody decides to like hit the big red button, everybody dies, kind of puts the nail in the coffin on nuclear conflict. It's the only reason we haven't had a major conflict like this since the end of the Second World War. But I that's one option. That's one way this could go. The other way is that if we do get into a war that we are not going to win, it's going to be hard to extricate ourselves from that, and get any sort of quote unquote peace with honor, that doesn't involve some sort of occupation, like not like the Russians are going to land troops on the shore in California, but like we're going to surrender and they're going to fly in and be here, or we wind up with our own fucking UN peacekeeping force. Not to mention the collapse of the American state. If the war had been happening for a while, the economy clearly would have already probably started to eat itself. But with the collapse of the American economy that would come out of a conflict like this, I wouldn't expect necessarily the Canadian state to make it through this either.
Canada doesn't outlive the United States by more than 20 years.
No, and not even because I don't want to say the Canadian state is weak. It's that in the event of an American collapse, the Canadian state wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility of being the white power on the fucking North American continent, or the flood of refugees, because people would just look to Canada as the next beacon, as the next America.
Yeah.
Can't handle the responsibility, lacks the economy, lacks the infrastructure, lacks the livable space for the influx of refugees they would likely see out of an event like this. Same goes for me, although I do think the Mexican state has a higher chance of survival out of something like this than the Canadian state.
They have a stronger territorial and resource basis, I think.
Well, they have a stronger territorial and resource base. They have a higher population.
And they're run by a competent regime. Like,
yeah,
Marina's going to be around for a while.
They're getting very regime pilled down in Mexico, and I'm loving it.
Yeah.
But the real thing is the cultural divide. People are not going to flee into Mexico should the American state collapse. Not in the numbers you would expect, based on proximity to Mexico. And the Mexican apparatus is far more competent militarily than the Canadians are. And I do have a feeling they would just get a little bit of revenge is a bad word. But I don't think they would take any displeasure in keeping Americans out.
Yeah. I think there is another option to World War III / a global conflagration. I think it's that nobody wins. It's just everybody just fights until they're exhausted and just kind of like nobody wins.
Do you think it's 1984?
Nobody winning implies that something ends, right? Like 1984,
Yeah.
The conflict was unending. I mean, that's also a possibility.
I would completely disavow 1984 as like a logical conclusion to anything.
No, it's not.
It's a made up, make believe, be scared type deal. But I mean, there is the nobody wins option. But if nobody wins, the West loses, right? Because it is much like Germany had to win World War II. They had to, right? Like that was the basis of their state. They had to win.
If I think nobody wins, the liberal world order loses and nothing replaces it. I think we're tossed back to systemic anarchy.
You don't think we're just tossed back to liberalism? I think we're tossed back to liberalism unless a left can rise.
No, I think we're tossed back to a period like where there is no overarching hegemonic world system. There's just like little fragments of people trying to build something else.
So you think we revert back to like a pre-Westphalia system?
It's not in the terms of actual governance, but in terms of international relations, yes.
Yes, in terms of international order. Obviously, I think borders still exist in the modern sense. Like the state exists in the modern sense. But like the international order as was written in Westphalia and like maybe even like the Berlin Conference, like that goes away.
Yeah, like nobody had the throne lies empty. That's what I think will happen.
I could agree with that, but I do think China just wins that though at the end.
China would be the best positioned, but when the throne's empty, things are pretty contingent.
Short of nuclear weapons being used, China wins.
Yes, in the long term, it would be their game to lose at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the other thing with and I think this is also why the American state has yet to faithfully pursue actually entering into like a global conflict like this, because it's not just American interests that push back against that. The entire Western order would suffer a balkanizing collapse at the exact same time as the American state. It's why like Canada would fall apart, but Latin America would probably just honestly begin to flourish without that yoke.
Honestly, nuclear war is like the best scenario for Latin America. I think at that point, the country that takes the throne, if in the case of a nuclear exchange, it's going to be a toss up between like Brazil and Argentina.
Well, it ain't going to be Argentina, but. And God help us if those Portuguese speaking fucks wind up in charge. A mayo-based pizza for every man. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why like Latin America wouldn't suffer that same fate. But like Europe would, because the European welfare state, the European system, is the only relic left of empire. Without that relic and without that exploitation that they're able to continue behind the backing of American rifles, European countries would look like Eastern Europe, like Western European countries would look like Eastern European countries.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the wealth that Europe has is great. It's vast, but the standard of living and the type of system that like France has compared to Poland, right? France would look like Poland if it didn't have a colonial empire to consistently keep exploiting.
Yes, yeah. One thing I do think that if the states aren't reduced entirely to a broken back thing, I think the throne lying empty would not take the boot off of the global south. I think it would make the boot press in harder, because interstate competition becomes the regulator of American hegemony is taken off of interstate competition, and I think at that point exploitation just ramps up because people need to squeeze more blood out of the stone.
I'm going to say yes and no, right? Because if the American yoke is broken, right? Let's say the American state kind of collapses in such a way where we are probably too busy dealing with ourselves to be involved. You're opening up space, right? Because, like, you know, for the global south, and I'm going to just specifically speaking of Africa here.
Yeah.
There is no reason to assume, right? And again, we're going to say that, let's say the nuclear taboo stays in place, because it should, right? And a rational actor will keep that in place. The rising stars of the African continent, without the American hegemon keeping it going, the rising stars of the African continent meet and surpass, like, in terms of just like war fighting capability, right? Let's just say straight up conflict. Like, I'm pretty sure like Nigeria could fucking make a run for their fucking money against like the English at this point. Like, I think that's the thing.
I mean, yeah, but then the exploitation is just being done by Nigerians.
Well, yes, I know what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that the global north will no longer, like, it'll be, the global south will be, without the west, right? Like, if we just follow the trajectory of the economy, like, that's what's going to happen to Africa anyway. Like, it is those, not necessarily colonialist, but like those oppressive it's not colonialism in the way that we understand it. Yeah.
Neo-colonial.
I don't even think it's neo-colonial. I think it's a whole new thing, in my opinion. But it is like the domination of like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa over the rest of the continent.
In Egypt. Egypt is a massive player
and
in
Algeria.
North Africa.
There are like major economies in Africa, and the problem, like, you know, people go, "Oh, Africa, all poor." Well, yes and no. Africa is incredibly wealthy, right? And let's say the yoke falls off, right? Because if Europe falls apart, well, this is the Congo's fucking time to shine. So like that is like, those are all places much like what we think of when we look at Latin America and we go, wow, without Western intervention, you know, Brazil and Argentina are first-rate world-class powers. They just never get the opportunity to, because every time they get close, we do a coup.
I'm gonna say, as somebody who is extremely pessimistic about a lot of this type of thing, I think the only thing that really meaningfully changes in that case is who's wearing the boot. The boot's still there.
Well, I agree. Someone's always wearing the boot.
Yeah.
Without a global socialist revolution.
Yeah, the boot will remain on the proletariat's neck. The key is that it won't be on the boot for a tiny moment when the boot changeover is happening, because that gap is an opportunity.
I will give Trotsky one fucking thing. One. For socialist revolutions to succeed, it has to happen everywhere.
Yes.
Socialism in one country only worked in the 20th century context in which it lived.
I would also argue that didn't work. We can have a Thunderdome episode about that.
I know. But I would say, even if it didn't work, Trotsky was an idiot outside of all of that. The Soviet Union should have spent a lot more money, resources, time, and energy trying to foment a larger revolution. I agree. Like, I do think it was stupid to do what they did, but if they hadn't done it, they probably would have lost World War II. So things kind of evened out there. But it would take a global event. But that's why I do think if there is a third world war, the boot coming off for even a moment, that's our moment to try and seize power. Now, there's not a lot of people who are educated anymore, so you really just have to There's gonna be goddamn paternalistic socialism because it's gonna have to be like a very small cadre class doing the whole thing. But yeah, like just due to the time constraints, because I think like a lot of people like and leftists do the same thing liberals do and conservatives do the same thing all of us do, which is where we feel very high and low based on like where the state of the world is.
It's so over. We're so back. It's never been more over.
Yeah, like we could just be being doomers right now. There might be no third world war, if ever, but maybe it won't happen for 100 years. Who knows? It all depends on how fast the contradictions come into play. If they do the tariffs, we're speeding up the timeline. But what's the counteracting force here, right? Like there will always be a counteracting force because liberalism, for as fascist as it is a separate ideology and will has its own desires.
I think there is something that we're kind of missing out on here. That's the climate.
I'm obviously problem. But I personally, I believe in the indomitable human spirit, and B, I think if the climate was going to kill us, it would have already happened.
The issue is less killing; it's more the constant disasters just taking even more slack out, like just tightening the rope more.
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of why, like, the United States is both uniquely gifted and uniquely cursed. Like, if we look at Helene, like where I'm from, is destroyed. It's still destroyed. It won't be back for years, and that takes slack out of the system. Now we get hit, like, let's say we get hit with another like Helene-sized storm that takes the same path. That's it. Those towns aren't getting rebuilt. It's over, right? But also, people don't tend to abandon where they live.
Yeah.
And so the disasters obviously will continue to increase, but there are going to remain. The majority of the world will remain habitable. Now, we run into some very large like caveats to that, and it's not that this is a large swath of land; it's where a lot of people are, and that is strictly South Asia.
Yeah, Bangladesh.
Like China, not going to have this problem. Africa, not going to have this problem in the same way. But it's Southern Asia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, because even Southeast Asia, their monsoon seasons are going to be weirder, but it's not going to get so hot there that you can't go outside, and it's not going to like literally sink their country like Bangladesh.
A big chunk of the North China Plain is vulnerable, I think.
I believe the Chinese have already been doing like
Godspeed
Dutch style
to them,
shit. Yeah. But what I will say is, in this whole consideration we've made here, we have not considered the world's third largest economy, and the country with the most people in it. Period. India. And now that is because of my personal bias that they are going to be fucking useless in any conflict that we get into because they can't pick a side, and they will probably either sit neutral or take their fucking opportunity to nuke Pakistan. Right. That is a country already run by Hitlers. All right. That country is 1 billion Hitler particles. I don't know what to do about. I don't know how to talk about India. I don't know what to do. I don't understand it. But the Hitler particles are rampant in that country.
If it's any consolation, the BJP is starting to have its support wax a bit, but not nearly enough. I think it's only like 60%, not 60, like 55, 53% Hitler now.
53% Hitler. But either way, what like the Indian state, like let's say in a World War III scenario, let's just call a spade a spade. India's not an industrial power.
No, they still have like basically feudal agricultural relations in massive parts of the country.
Yeah, like India is not an industrial power. They're a country with 1 billion people in it, and so they found enough guys to do a nuclear program. Like they are a nuclear power, yes. Do they have an aircraft carrier? Yes. Do they have a large air force? Yes. Did they build any of those things themselves? And do they have the capacity to build more of them? No. in a World War III style conflict, if India even wanted to get involved, it would be fighting China and losing so fucking horribly. They'd have to they got to start over. They'd balkanize. India is another one that like they'll balkanize before they like truly fall apart.
Or at least have a warlord period.
Yeah, which would be terrifying.
Oh my god, yeah.
Can you imagine how many more Twitter bots we would get? Bahamani posting?
Dude, I'm the thing that I'm worried about, not worried about, that I think about way too often that is probably healthy is like what the American warlord period is going to look like.
I'm gonna be one. I'm doing it. I'm gonna be king of Vermont.
All right.
Oh, it's gonna be bad.
It's gonna
Let's
be
just
bad.
be real. There's gonna be a lot of genocide going on in the United States. It's already kind of going on, and also the conditions seem to be ripe for like the American state itself to maybe pull one off if they really wanted to.
Yeah, and also like climate refugees are going to be a huge thing, and I think Gaza has shown us how Western states are going to treat those refugees.
Not one Floridian is entering my fucking state.
Oh, I mean like climate refugees from like Central America and South Asia.
Well, I think that's part of why we tolerate Mexico.
Yeah.
Because we will prop up the Mexican state to shoot those people on the southern Mexican border before we did it ourselves.
It doesn't matter if Morena is like is an insane social democrat regime. They'll do it for us.
They have to.
Yeah.
They not only do they know they have to, but the climate refugee crisis, like for better or worse, does spell disaster for every economy that those people have to flood into.
Yeah,
Look at a country like... Also, I don't know if the climate... Like, the fear of refugees from Latin America during the climate crisis, not only is that already realized, like, it's already going on and we're tolerating it, but they're not going to suffer the same fate as, like, the Sahel and South Asia, which that's a problem for China and for Russia and for Southern Europe. And Southern Europe has already chosen fascism. Russia has chosen, go ahead, you got to serve 2 years in Ukraine first. And I think China will probably also just choose shooting them all. China is full. Like, that's their idea.
China is looking down the barrel of the demographic crisis. It would actually be very smart of them to like, hey, come here, Chinese dream, nation of immigrants.
That's true. I do think the Chinese dream might be something that starts getting sold, especially as America continues to decline. I think China runs into a problem that most other countries don't run into, is that China is the only country that speaks Chinese. And it's quite a hard language to learn for anyone.
Yeah. I do think a more immigrant-friendly China would be like what Shanghai looks like in like 2100 is going to be very... If the Chinese don't go full Hitler mode, I think that would be very...
I don't think they will.
I think it is very interesting to see what like Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong look like in 100 years.
Yeah, I also think that in a global conflagration type scenario like India, Pakistan, they might just try to do whatever it is they feel like they got to duke out. But then there are other middle rate powers, because quite honestly, in terms of like power status, Pakistan probably ranks ahead of India just because they have a more centrally controlled, homogenous state.
I mean, it's just the Indus River Valley.
Yeah, it's easier to deal with. I do think that there are some middle rate powers that will probably make a play for themselves, not necessarily in terms of territorial conquest, but in terms of freeing themselves from the yoke of Western influence and control. And on that list, obviously, Iran, I think they'll come out the other side of this just fine. I think that like there is a chance that Afghanistan becomes a Dubai, if left alone, because they are incredibly resource wealthy, and their government's no different than the goddamn Saudis.
That's true. Yeah.
So there's no reason why, if left alone, they don't just follow that path of development. So then you've got your Vietnam. That's a middle rate power.
Vietnam, middle rate power, very friendly to the United States.
Yeah, but also very friendly to China. Like they are.
No, they are not. They hate each other. They have a territorial dispute in the Spratlys, and China.
Yeah, but everybody has a territorial dispute over the goddamn Spratlys.
Well, the point is that all those countries.
Push comes to shove, Vietnam does not want that fight.
Yeah, that's true. Push comes to shove, they'll align with China, but I do not think they will be happy about it.
No, but they'll survive.
They'll live. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got you got to remember you got some cracker countries down there.
Yeah.
The Aussies, the Kiwis. I don't know what's going to happen to them in terms of a collapse, because I think New Zealand's probably a little bit. It's survivable in terms of the climate crisis. They'll be fine.
Yeah.
Be a little warmer. But Australia, that fucking hell island.
Yeah.
I don't know how they, and also Australia is much more heavily dependent on food imports.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in terms of a World War III type scenario, you also see some goddamn Volga famines coming out of it.
Yeah.
Including in the American world, we get a lot of our fertilizer from the global South and China, and if that dries up, it's going to become very apparent very quick that the Midwest has not been able to support this amount of food production for this long.
It's going to make the Dust Bowl look like a fucking, I don't know what it would look like.
I know. Good thing I live on a river.
I live in the PNW. We have a water carrying capacity of yes.
Yeah, man, but brother, Vermont's the same fucking way. It's here. We got it. So yeah, I mean, I think the American state, goddamn it, collapse should be imminent, but I'm probably just wrong. Although I did do my map of the Electoral College almost perfectly aligned with what happened, which I'm not happy about. But
if anything, we were both too optimistic. You gave the Dems Michigan.
I did.
The only thing I think Michigan was the only one you got wrong.
You know how good that was? I fucking called it.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah. The fucking seltzer poll got me. It got me. It made me. Note to self: save the living out until they win.
I will say, yeah, I kind of thought this might be controversial. I thought Kamala lost with the Puerto Rico stuff because I knew in my heart that was going to drive the white Cuban vote out even more because they hate everybody who's not them. And also when the reaction to it was only coming from the most annoying people online, I was like, oh, he's going to win, huh? But then the seltzer poll came out and it got my ass too. I was like, she's got it in the bag. Look at her go. And then it didn't happen.
Yeah. What the fuck?
Anyway,
well,
this was not a chronological analysis at all.
No, it was just us saying whatever came to mind. I'm definitely going to put a massive fucking content warning in front of this because we talked about some pretty heavy shit, and I know a lot of people are not in the mood to listen to that.
Yeah, and then we just postulated about World War III for 25 minutes.
Yeah. That's most of the heavy shit, talk about civilizational collapse. I don't think people want to hear about that, but get trained, get organized. I think that's more important than getting a gun.
Build dual power.
And actually, you know what?
Unionize your fucking workplace.
On that note, I do want to read the closing paragraph of Hinterland because I think it is very important right now.
Read
as
it.
A closing statement.
Go for it. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So this is going to sound like a shot at you, Greg. I apologize. Personally, I don't understand the compulsion to mine history for words that might describe what's to come. Fact is that the approaching flood has no name. Any title it might take is presently lost in the noise of its gestation, maybe just beginning to be spoken in a language that we can hardly recognize. There will be no commune because this isn't Paris in 1871. There will be no dual power because this isn't Russia in 1917. There will be no autonomy because this isn't Italy in 1977. I'm running this in 2017, and I don't know what's coming, even though I know something is rolling towards us in the darkness. And the world can end in more ways than one. Its presence is hinted at somewhere deep inside the evolutionary meat grinder of riot repeating riot, all echoing ad infinitum through the year of our Lord 2016, where the anthem returned to its origin and the corpse flowers bloomed all at once as Louisiana was turned to water, and no one knew why. I don't call people comrade, I just call them friend. Because whatever's coming has no name, and anyone who says they hear it is a liar. All I hear are guns cocking over trap snares unrolling into infinity.
I don't think we need to say anything else.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, other than that last paragraph, I think what I want to say, I'm going to quote one of my Twitter mutuals here. This election doesn't change at all what Americans, quote-unquote, deserve. Americans still deserve the same thing everyone on the planet deserves. And that is, and I'm going to quote directly from @Doug Burzum on Twitter, communist revolution in all its infinite mercy and unflinching brutality.
I agree. It's a good closer.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.